The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal Television for Agricultural Business Decisions is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I'm Alex Makovica, filling in for Bryce Duskett. This week on Market Journal, we'll be discussing some new dicamba regulations our soybean producers should be aware of as we get close to the planting season. Eric Hunt has the latest when it comes to the weather. Doug Simon of Tredas will fill us in on what's catching his attention in the grain markets. And we've got some bonus content from this year's Women in Agriculture Conference. But first this week, the USDA's Farm Service Agency has recently announced producers are able to enroll in the 2024 Dairy Margin Coverage Program, also known as DMC. This program provides producers with price support to help offset milk and feed price differences. USDA's Farm Service Agency has revised the regulations for DMC to allow eligible dairy operations to make a one-time adjustment to their established production history. This adjustment will combine previous established supplemental production history with DMC production history for those dairy operations that participated in supplemental dairy margin coverage during a prior coverage year. DMC is a voluntary risk management program that offers protection to the dairy producers when the difference between the all milk price and the average feed price falls below a certain dollar amount selected by the producer. For dairy operations that were enrolled in 2023 DMC under a multi-year lock-in contract, lock-in eligibility will be extended until December 31st of this year. In addition, dairy operations enrolled in multi-year lock-in contracts are eligible for the discounted premium rate during the 2024 coverage year. To confirm DMC lock-in coverage or to opt out in favor of an annual contract for 2024, dairy operations having lock-in contracts need to enroll during the 2024 DMC enrollment period. DMC offers different levels of coverage, even an option that's free to producers minus a $100 administrative fee. The fee is waived for dairy producers who are considered limited resource, beginning, socially disadvantaged, or military veteran. To determine the appropriate level of DMC coverage for a specific dairy operation, producers, you can use the online dairy decision tool. Next up, it's been a few weeks since this year's Women in Agriculture Conference took place in Kearney. We've got some bonus content to share with you from this year's event. We had the opportunity to catch up with Nebraska Extension agricultural economist Anastasia Meyer. She talked more about the advice when it comes to land lease prices and practices. Anastasia, thanks for joining us. We'll start with this. For anybody thinking about leasing their land, what's the first step?
Well, the first step is probably decide how you want to lease it. Do you want to offer cash rent, and where do you get those rental rates from? Do you want to go crop share? And then the question is, how much do you want to crop share? Do you want, how much of the management decisions do you want to be involved with, and how much do you want to be writing checks out for those inputs? Or do you want to hire a farm manager? Do you not want to deal with those day-to-day decisions that a lot of tenants will come to landlords with? Or do you hire and have it all custom farmed? The landowners need to decide, do they want all the risk and then you get the reward, or do you want a lower risk and not as much reward? It kind of just depends on how involved do you want to be. It depends on what you want to do with the farm.
$1 million question would be, what are going rates for leases right now? What are you seeing across the region?
So traditionally, this last year, we have seen everything increase. Just kind of depends on the region how much it increased. The problem with these surveys is we're only as good as the information that we get, and the surveys usually tend to lag. So when the markets go down, the surveys say that the leasing rates usually lag a couple of years, and we know that, but we're working with the information that we have. So where to find it? There are there's a great real estate survey done. It's released around mid-March every single year. They're working on it right now, and that gives the rates for like the crop reporting district, so it's by region. And then the National Ag Statistics Survey does a survey when the budgets allow every year or every other year, and that's when they found out like what is the going rate for that one single county. But the problem is with these surveys too is we don't ask, is it a family member renting to another family member? What's the quality of the ground? What's a productivity? How easy is it? That kind of a thing. Because those all drastically vary, and from one corner from a county to another can vary drastically. Or, what's the conservation practices? Is this an easy field to farm, or does it need some work? And it's not so easy. So it's cash rental rates. Need to reflect those. So I always say those rates that are published are always a good starting point of where to go with your cash rental rate.
Sure. Like you mentioned, a lot of factors that go into that price.
A lot of factors, yeah.
Okay, so we were talking about written agreements, and that is something that is critically important. Talk more about that aspect.
Yeah, so gone are the days of everything being a handshake agreement. Those used to be the way it is, but now we really urge people to get things in writing, because especially as farmland is being transitioned, it's really a clear picture of what did you say versus I said, and then if that land transitions, then it's clear, you're not wondering, it protects the landlord and the tenant. And then there are also some things that you need to think about in that written lease, like, do you want to retain the right to hunt and fish? Because as a landlord, if you rent it out and you go hunting, that tenant could actually have trespassing against you on your own land because you didn't retain the rights to hunt. Now, nobody should do that because it would probably end up with a termination notice. But legally, you need to retain those rights and any other special clauses that you have. And then it also kind of clears up, like, when does a termination need to be? Verbal leases need to have 6 months notice prior to March 1 for a termination. But written notices, you can put in a different date if that works better with you.
All right, Anastasia, I know you are a wealth of information. If people want to get more information, what's the best way to do that? Yeah,
so cap.unl.edu, Center for Ag Profitability. There is 5 of us located around the state, and this is what we do. We love talking about this topic. So give us a call, and we're happy to talk to you on the phone, talk through what you should be thinking about a lease. Are you thinking about a flex lease? Like, what does that all involve? Succession planning. We're here to help you.
All right. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Well, it is time now to turn our attention over to the markets. Earlier this week, Tredas commodity consultant Doug Simon stopped by our studio to go over the latest trends in the grain markets. Here are his thoughts from Monday morning.
Let's start today's conversation talking about the WASI, which was released last week. Mostly some tweaks on the international front. What were you paying attention to?
Well, the biggest one was China. USDA went back and raised their exports last year by about 3.6 million metric tons, and then they also increased the demand or the exports or their imports by another 3 million metric tons. So you've got a little over 6 million metric tons that are going to be going to China, and they actually went back and have been looking at the shipments or actual shipping data rather than believing what China predicts or what they're forecasting on their imports. So that's what they're doing now, so USDA is getting better at evaluating something, on our balance sheets, which I think everybody will applaud. But that's if you look at 6 million metric tons, 40 million bushels a metric ton, that's about, 240 million bushels, which our carryover for this next year is projected to be around 315 million bushels. So that's a nice benefit to see them allegedly importing more beans.
Well, we'll see how that story develops. To your point, Doug, we look at the charts in particular for corn and soybeans. We've had a nice little boost here so far in the month of March. Some of that, I suppose, we could tie to the WASB. What else is giving a little bit of a bullish sentiment here?
Well, it's been bearish for 5 months, since last October, and it's just been every day you come in, it'd start out a little lower, and then it would just, kind of waterfall lower every day. Now we've actually maybe turned to the point where the funds got record short on corn a couple weeks ago. Now they're record short on the soybeans, but with those funds having massive, and the managed funds or the people that are kind of speculating in the markets have got a massive short on at some point, I know a lot of people have been talking about it in the press and news, but at some point they'll get pushed out of that. Typically happens where the commercials now, they've actually been buying where they'll come in and start selling that. But as they start to deleverage out of that short position, we should see a little bit of a rally. And we've been seeing that where, like this morning, corn was down 3 or 4 and beans were down 10. Wheat was down quite a bit. Wheat actually is 30 cents off its low today, and corn's maybe 6 off its low, and beans are maybe 5 off its low. But we're starting to see more of a, start out lower but turn higher today, which is actually kind of a nice sign.
Yeah, anytime we can see green on the screen, people are happy about that.
Absolutely.
You keep a close eye on the spreads. What have you been tracking on that front?
Well, we've been, last year we were in inverse where the nearby was, higher than the deferred. Now we've been in a carry market, and we were 25 cents a carry, which was a record. I think the most we ever saw between Dece corn and March corn was 18 previously. We got out to 25, so we're still got a decent spread out from May to the July. It tells you that we've got adequate stocks around. Our basis levels are, maybe a 5 over to 10 over type level, the May. So unfortunately, I don't really see basis levels exploding like we did the last 2 or 3 years, and those spreads being more of a carry market. So there's adequate corn around. So USDA's numbers didn't change on the carryover last week. We're still at 2.1 billion bushels. That's still adequate corn stock. So that even if we do get some type of short covering by the funds, there's still going to be a lot of overhead pressure from farmers selling.
Well, let's get your general sentiment here. We're not quite to planting season. A lot of people getting antsy about it, though. As you see where the markets could go over the next 6 months or so, what are going to be the key factors? Of course, right now it seems like all eyes on South America.
Right. That's a big deal with their weather, U.S. weather. I mean, we've shifted aggressively from a El Nino to La Nina. We've seen cool water off the west coast of Peru just pop up here in the last week. So that's a problem for us. If we tend to be cold up south of Alaska and then down off the coast of California. Elwyn Taylor, my favorite climatologist of all time, he always talked about kind of La Nina, El Nino, and if there's that heat moves in north of Hawaii, that cold water's up there. If we do make that transition, that tends to leave us drier here, tends to put the heat out here in the western plains, and it doesn't bode well. But Brazil is also fighting some of that same deal where, like our crop here in the U.S. last year, we had a lot of variable rain. If you look at what's going on in Brazil right now, they've got 130% of moisture in some areas, and then they've got 30% of moisture over the last 30 days. So a lot of people are saying, well, there's some low areas. Well, yeah, that's true, but there's some areas that are going to have decent yields, so there's a lot of variability. We had that here in the U.S., but that La Nina tends to leave us definitely drier next year. So that's important. Then at the end of the month, we've got acres. So when you put those acres and projected yields together, we're supposed to grow carry out somewhere between 2.3 billion to 2.5 billion, assuming we have a 181 bushel crop. Are we going to have that? We don't know, but that's what they're using today. So you got to think about, if that happens, seasonally, we tend to go lower 70% of the time. That's what our crop insurance tells us. That's what those seasonal tell us. So we're kind of, I said, the baseball analogy, we're going to have some chances to get up the bat, take some swings here. We're going to get 3 strikes, or we're going to get, maybe some balls in there too, but you better be ready to do something, seasonally. Those funds are really short. If they start to cover, they give us some opportunities I think you need to be looking at. You can do some things with options from a strategy standpoint, use puts, or you can hedge or do a hedge drive and buy some calls, do some things that are flexible now before we don't know what the weather's going to do for sure, but it'll give you some time at least to get some floors underneath things with both your corn and your beans. Because we've had that last year when the funds were record long, you should be selling corn then. And now we're at the contrast to that where we're record short. Yeah, if we get the rallies, then you want to be selling. So, and now cattle have gone back to highs again. There was a lot of discouragement when we were at those lows on cattle, and we've been there just recently on the beans. We get those opportunities. We got to have a mindset to kind of be, okay, hey, what am I going to do about it now?
Got to capitalize it. Let's wrap up with this, Doug. Always seems like there's a conversation on the national front, corn versus beans. I don't know if that's really a story that is pertinent to those of us here in Nebraska. It seems like people are on their crop rotations and stick to that. On the national front, though, is that something we need to be paying attention to?
Well, University of Illinois, when they did their profitability numbers back in January, they were showing an advantage to the bean side of it. And, probably a little bit of a break even or profitability in the beans and a loss on the corn. So I think there's probably, and we saw that in Brazil, they shifted out of corn and into beans this year, and there's some talk. We had a meeting back in January with a lot of our clients, and maybe 1 or 2 farmers raised their hands that they're going to shift to more beans. In Nebraska, dryland beans, that's a diversification from an agronomy standpoint or rainfall, tend to stay 50-50. You go a little bit further west, you're maybe 2/3, 1/3 beans. You go way west, you're more 75% corn and the quarter beans. But we've got those bean plants going in at David City, which I went by on Friday, and you could see it going up there, and there's one up in Norfolk. That's going to shift probably some of our acreage. I think there's probably a little more interest out west where we may see that over time. Maybe not this planting season, but over the next 2 or 3.
Thanks to Doug for stopping by this week. We'll have more on the markets next week. But in the meantime, if you have a question you'd like for us to ask our future analysts, be sure to shoot us an email or get in touch with us on social media. We'll be sure to pass those questions along. Irrigated soybeans across Nebraska and the Upper Plains did quite well in 2023, but rain-fed or dryland soybeans, that was a different story depending on where you were growing them. And many of the drought-stricken portions of the state, extreme heat in August and early September doomed rain-fed soybean yields, and the soybeans that were harvested were extremely small. That said, precipitation outlooks have improved since last summer, so the projections for soybeans are looking up. You can get all the details about the upcoming growing season in the March issue of Nebraska Farmer. Well, that means it's time now to get a quick check on the weather with Nebraska Extension ag climatologist and Market Journal chief meteorologist Eric Hunt. Eric, we have had some relatively mild spring weather here, at least in the capital city. How are soil temperatures looking across the state as producers gear up for planting season?
Thanks, Alex. It's been a warm and interesting week here in the capital city. Speaking of those soil temperatures, they are quite mild across the entire state, and we even have pockets of soil temperatures in the low 50s, south central Nebraska and southeastern Nebraska, and here south of Ainsworth. In terms of the week ahead, we are expecting a cold front to be moving through the state on Saturday. Sunday will be a bit chillier across most of the state with highs in the 40s to the low to mid 50s. We will be having some breezy north winds, and areas that have not had much precipitation in the last week to 2 weeks, or even beyond that, are at a higher risk of fire danger, so please be careful. The first half of next week, though, looks really, really nice. Ample sunshine, temperatures in the 60s, potentially even low 70s in some spots. But as we head toward the later portion next week, though, we are going to be looking at a storm system moving into the western U.S., and there is a chance there will be an area of low pressure developing on the lee of the Rockies, moving into our region. Now, the timing of this is still a little bit uncertain, and the actual impacts are still a bit uncertain. But I would say there is a really good chance we are going to cool off significantly by later next week, and we also are going to have chances for rain and some snow. And particularly right now, it looks like central and northeastern Nebraska are possibly in the line for some pretty significant snowfall. So again, that's a ways out, but don't put that snowblower away if you live in the central and eastern portion of the state, because you might need it next weekend. CPC is showing a pretty good chance of precipitation across pretty much the entire country as we head into the last week of March. With a pretty good chance of some cooler temperatures as we head into the last week of the month as well. So we are probably entering a more stormy and cooler period, which would be good for recharging some of the soil moisture that we need in the state. In terms of precipitation, again, tremendous precipitation in west central Nebraska late last week, where we actually had almost 15 to 20 inches of snow in some parts of Lincoln County. Better precipitation fell Wednesday night and Thursday morning here across parts of south central and southeastern Nebraska. Of course, some of this was last Thursday, Friday as well. But again, this is very welcome precipitation since a lot of the state has not had much meaningful moisture in the last, say, month and a half. And that lack of meaningful precipitation has led to some degradation here across parts of northeastern Nebraska where we have gone into abnormal dryness. Now, it's not quite drought yet, but it is a warning. We need to start getting some precipitation here north at Norfolk and up toward Concord, or we're going to start seeing some things go downhill pretty quickly. We did see a little bit of improvement here across parts of southwestern Nebraska with that precipitation, so that's good news. In terms of those precipitation deficits in absolute terms, we have seen going back to mid-January. Now, again, we had a lot of snow first part of January, but since then, the eastern portion of the state has been pretty dry, and we are seeing deficits approaching 2 inches in that time period going back to mid-January. Better precipitation here out in the western portion of the state where we were a little bit drier early in the winter, so that's good news. Soil moisture, again, mostly in the near normal range for this time of year. This is a lot better than last year, but we still need moisture, particularly in this part of the state, to really recharge our profile. We had a relatively warm February, actually a very warm February. It was the second warmest February statewide, and for portions of eastern Nebraska, it was the warmest February on record, as it was for a lot of the Midwest. The record warm winter, though, or near record warm winter across the country, though, has not necessarily deterred there being some decent snowfall across some parts of the southern and central Rockies. So the good news is we actually are seeing snow water equivalent values right around there, a little bit above the median for the last 30 years. Thanks, and back to you, Alex.
Thanks so much, Eric. We'll be keeping a close eye on that. And finally today, soybean growers in Nebraska and across the U.S. recently have been navigating the complexities of weed management and dicamba-tolerant soybeans, as last month a federal court in Arizona vacated registration of XtendiMax, Ingenia, and Tavium. The ruling will put some growers of soybeans in a management challenge, recognizing that not all acres of dicamba-tolerant soybeans will be equally affected. This nuanced situation reflects the U.S. EPA's provision, allowing the use of extending dicamba stocks under specific conditions, meaning that the impact of the ruling will vary depending on a grower's current inventory and the timing of those purchases. Earlier this week, Market Journal host Bryce Duskett sat down with Nebraska Extension Weed Management Specialist Amit Jalla to learn more about the implications of this ruling for Nebraska soybean producers.
Joining us today on Crop Talk is Amit Jalla. He is a University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension Weed Management Specialist. Amit, we appreciate you joining us. We have some news to talk about on the dicamba front. This is going to have an impact for Nebraska soybean producers. Talk about where we stand today.
That is true. There have been some changes on use of dicamba-based products. That includes 3 products which are labeled in dicamba-resistant soybean, Ingenia, Tavium, and XtendiMax. So early February this year, federal government, federal court in Arizona, they vacated the registration of these 3 products, and so now growers need to consider some other options if they do not have already purchased them.
Well, let's talk about those options. If I'm a Nebraska soybean grower planning to plant soybeans resistant to dicamba this year, what are the things I need to be considering right now?
So number one, if you have already purchased any of those 3 products, you can use them pre-emergence or post-emergence up to the certain growth stage. And you also need to remember, like, the end of June deadline is still there. So regardless if you use in a normal year or this year, you cannot spray any of those 3 dicamba-based products after June 30th in Nebraska. Some other states has different deadline, but for Nebraska, I would recommend to make sure they do not spray after June 30th. And if you do not have any of those dicamba-based products, you can also use some other herbicides. For example, glufosinate-based herbicides can be applied post-emergence for controlling existing weeds. And there are also some other PPO inhibiting herbicides that can be applied. So I would not be panic too much if I don't have dicamba, because we have been controlling weeds without dicamba before this dicamba-resistant soybean came to the market.
A couple of follow-up questions based on what you're saying. First, you bring up that June 30th deadline and mention that is a Nebraska-specific deadline. Why do we have that in place? Just some background information for the audience today.
It is because just to reduce the off-target dicamba injury issues. So each state has different deadline, and in Nebraska, this is what written on the label. Some states, they have some early deadlines. This is just to avoid some late season dicamba off-target injury issues, because we have done some studies and it says when sensitive soybean can get any off-target injury, there are more chances of more loss in your soybean growth and development if this dicamba injury can hit after flowering stage. So some other states has some early deadline for applying those 3 dicamba-based products, but in Nebraska we have June 30th deadline.
Because of those deadlines, it's been a bit of a controversial product across the ag industry. Dicamba has been over its short lifespan here, but what's made dicamba effective for soybean growers but also cotton growers in the South?
It can provide pretty good control of broadleaf weeds, and I would say sensitive broadleaf weeds, because there are some cases of dicamba resistant water hemp and dicamba resistant palmer amaranth in other states. Every year we are testing, collecting seeds from Nebraska fields where there was a control failure of applying dicamba on controlling them. So we have been testing, but so far we have not confirmed, but it is just a matter of time, I would say. So that's why, again, I would like to mention that growers should not consider dicamba as the only option for controlling herbicide-resistant weeds because it is just a matter of time when we will see dicamba-resistant weeds in Nebraska.
We'll certainly see what plays out at the federal level. You mentioned the EPA is involved here, courts as well, so there'll be more news on that front. There's a management guide for controlling weeds in the state. I want to make that kind of our drive-home message for the audience today. They can go there for more information, correct?
Yes, we already have that guide available online to purchase. It's a 2024 guide for weed, disease, and insect management, and we have all the information that growers can consider. Because the first message I would give is you can use any pre-emergence herbicide in all type of soybean. So that's the good thing about pre-emergence herbicide is it's not trait specific. As long as the product is labeled in soybean, you can use in any type of soybean. So my first recommendation will be just to start with a pre-emergence herbicide that can be applied at planting soybean, that should have multiple herbicide mode of action, so that can provide a pretty good initial control of weeds. And then even there are some pre-emergence residual herbicides you can apply post-emergence. For example, acetochlor-based herbicides, you can apply post-emergence. Pyroxasulfone-based herbicide, you can apply post-emergence. So they will not control existing weeds, but they can provide some overlapping residual activity in the field. So if growers have a lot of issue of herbicide-resistant water hemp and palmer amaranth, using this overlapping residual activity of products will be really useful. And one more message I can give to the growers is we are organizing Nebraska Extension Weed Management Field Day on June 26th at South Central Ag Lab near Clay Center. So this is the field day where we provide all the updates and new technology and new herbicides and everything basically for weed management in corn and soybean and sorghum and also in popcorn. It's free to attend, and you can register online at agronomy.unl.edu/fielddays.
Growers, if you're unsure of a program selection, you can refer to the 2024 Guide for Weed, Disease, and Insect Management in Nebraska. Growers are also encouraged to contact their local University of Nebraska research and extension specialist for options and help in building alternative weed management plans. Well, that's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to follow Market Journal on YouTube and social media to join in on that conversation. Bryce Duskett will be back next week. Until then, I'm Alex Makovica wishing you a safe and productive week. Thanks for joining.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.